When I was a small boy, I had very few friends. I occupied myself with reading, even as a child. By the time I was in first grade, I was reading Dante's Inferno and Stephen King's It, while many of my less mentally acute classmates were still reading picture books. Along with a lot of time spent reading, video games were growing rapidly in popularity. When I was young, when I was barely in kindergarten, I remember seeing the pixelated, extremely low-resolution screen of a Warcraft 1 game, and I was amazed. It nearly hypnotized me as I watched the little blocks of men and orcs run around, chop down trees, and murder each other. Classic consoles like Sega Genesis had only recently come out, along with the first primitive PC games like Doom and Diablo. I was the type of person to never throw away any books or games. About anything else, I didn't give a shit, but these things were different. Books in the Middle Ages were worth more than their weight in gold, and perhaps I still had some unconscious racial memory of that dark time. I was sifting through boxes of old childhood mementos in my garage when I found the console that would cause me such trouble. The boxes were all marked Andrew's Games and my mother's flowing cursive. When she had died a few months earlier, I had gone to clean out her house and found it in the basement along with other dusty boxes. I had taken them all home to look through them later. My brother Tristan was by my side, his shaved head gleaming with sweat in the hot, stuffy garage. Sweat glistened on his upper lip as he chugged a beer, his third in the past hour. He was always a heavy drinker. Like me, Tristan was in his mid-30s and had grown up in the early video game era, playing lots of classic Nintendo, Doom, and Diablo. I figured he would be a good person to have around, as he was one of the few people I knew who would actually be able to appreciate the collection. His beer belly hung low over his too tight blue jeans, jiggling as he circled the table like a shark. "You've got a lot of Sonic crap in here," Tristan said, rifling through the box and pulling out boxes of Sega Genesis games. "I always hated Sonic. Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat were way better games. How can anyone hate Sonic? That's like hating Mario," I said as we organized and stacked games on a large wooden table. I figured it was time to sell some of this stuff, if anyone even wanted old games like these. My fingers closed around something round, about the size of a baseball. I looked down, seeing a strange console laying at the bottom corner of the box with a spherical plastic eye attached to the top. I pulled the console out, inspecting it closely. Tristan went quiet by my side. I gently laid it out on the table, recognition hitting me like a flash of lightning as I stared intently at the console. It was bright green, all fluorescent day glow colors. At the top of it, it had a single staring eye, the dilated pupil staring out intently forwards. Then, red vessels spiderwebbed through the plastic sclere, making the eye seem even more bloodshot and insane. Around the circumference of the eye, I saw small, plastic tentacles waving out to the side. "Holy hell," I said, excited. "It's my virtual god. I haven't thought about this thing in such a long time." Tristan looked at me oddly, staring between me and the console, as if expecting a punchline. A long, lulling sound whispered from his open mouth. "What? That's not a real thing," he said, confused. He picked up the console, bringing it inches from his right eye, and squinting down at it before flipping it over. "Is this some sort of art project or something? What the hell even is this? I never saw you have this when we were kids." "Are you kidding me?" I answered fervently, pulling out the small, green games from the box. "Look, there's games for it right here." He just slid this square cartridge into this hole. I showed him the black opening like a knife slice stretching out beneath the eye, and you hit the top of the eye to turn it on. It was so cool. I can't believe I forgot all about it. "Show me," Tristan said, unconvinced. He picked up the games for the virtual god, looking through them slowly. Dead Man's Alley, Dark Presence. What the hell are those games? I've never heard of any of them. Are these all Chinese knockoffs or something? He laughed. "That's probably why I've never heard of this thing. This is probably some piece of trash third world console." I gave him a half smile. "Let's turn it on and see," I said, hurrying back towards the living room with the console in one hand and a couple random games in the other, the electrical cord dragging on the floor behind me like a dead snake. A pounding excitement rose in my chest. "What game do you want to try first?" I asked excitedly, looking at the fluorescent green cartridges in my hand. I put them out on the coffee table in front of Tristan, running behind the TV to connect the console and plug in the power cord. "Well, we have Purgatory's Scream here," and he glanced down at the other game, Mass Shooter Extra Fun Time. He laughed crazily at that. As Tristan said the name of each game, the memories of playing them as a young boy came back to me, creeping out of my subconscious like childhood monsters. He handed me Purgatory's Scream, watching the console with pronounced skepticism. Good choice. You're going to love this. I remember you have to fight your way through Purgatory until you find God, I said, not wanting to ruin too much of the game for him. I turned on the TV and went over to the virtual God, putting the game cartridge in the slot. I had to twist it from side to side to get it in, just like when I was a kid. It was all coming back to me. I threw Tristan one of the controllers before turning back to the console. The white noise and static hissed on the TV expectantly. I stepped forward, raising my hand and slamming it down on the top of the eye. It immediately started glowing with a pale, ghostly light. The console shrieked and came to life beneath my hand, as if I had struck a cobra. The plastic suddenly felt warm and fleshy, writhing and twitching beneath my fingers. The eye rolled wildly in its socket, flicking randomly over the room, before stopping and looking straight at me. The static continued to hiss on the TV. I heard Tristan give a hoarse scream behind me. I could only stare, open-mouthed. The lidless eye never blinked. It gleamed with a fanatical luster, a deep rod of insanity shining deep down in its dilated pupil. I heard a low mechanical voice crying out through the scream of the static. You have chosen Purgatory's Scream, the voice said, exploding through the room in deafening blasts and rumbles. Thank you for choosing the virtual God. Please be patient while we load your new reality. The white noise from the TV continued escalating into a shrieking cacophony, the static expanding out over everything. The dots covered the furniture, the walls, and the ceiling in flickering patterns. I felt myself falling forward. I realized with horror that the tunnel had started sucking me in somehow. It curved around me like a spiraling, three-dimensional fractal of black and white dots. I tried to scream as I got pulled forward, but it strangled in my throat. When I started flying into it at the speed of light, the tunnel morphed and warped around me like an acid hallucination, melting and dripping into spiraling black and white trails. A small exit at the end loomed far ahead, just a pinpoint of blackness. It came rushing up at me, widening into an abyss. I fell through it, landing hard on the ground. The air was knocked out of my lungs in a great whoosh, pain rocketing through my back. My head swam, and I couldn't see anything. I blinked quickly, trying to focus. For a long moment, I had no idea where I was or what had happened. Then my memories started filtering slowly back in. What? I rasped, looking around. Where the hell am I? I found myself laying in the middle of a dead valley. Enormous mountains covered in fine, white sands loomed overhead in every direction, their tops as sharp as scalpels. There wasn't a sign of life. As far as I could see, not a single blade of grass, or a tree, or insect flying through the air. The sky overhead constantly seeped with black smoke, the clouds bubbling and rippling with lightning strikes that moved from cloud to cloud every few seconds. Everything had a flat, gray sheen to it from the dim light shining through the clouds, except when the lightning illuminated the dead world in bright, strobing flashes. Tristan lay a few feet away, his eyes fluttering as he groaned, his fingers twitching and clenching. I crawled over to him, shaking him. He awoke suddenly, his dark eyes meeting mine. He sat up, his arms flailing wildly, almost striking me in the face. Calm down, I yelled, falling backwards onto a soft sand dune. It's just me. He grabbed his head, shaking it slowly from side to side. Did someone drug me or something? Tristan whispered in a hoarse voice. No, it was that goddamn thing in the box, the virtual god. As soon as I turned it on, it sucked us in somehow. This had never happened to me as a kid while playing the virtual god. He looked like he was about to say something in response, when the ground started trembling beneath us. At first, it was subtle, like the aftershocks of an earthquake, but it quickly accelerated into a cacophony of grinding stones and crashing earth. Black fissures opened up in the ground beneath my feet. The white sands disappeared down into them, as if falling into an eternal hourglass. Something in the ground roared, a primal wail that split and distorted like thunder, so loud I could feel my bones tremble with the force of it. It reminded me of a lion's roar, but it sounded electronically slowed and amplified in strange, dissonant risings and fallings. A titanic face the size of a car emerged from the abyss. Its skin looked like rough sandstone, a golden beige with fine cracks. Two enormous, lidless eyes sat on the top of its pointed head, but it had no nose, no mouth, or ears. The eyes bulged from its stony body, bulging spheres, as glossy as obsidian. The primal roaring that emanated from its monstrous body seemed to flow out of every part of its skin, rippling the air in powerful currents like flowing mirages. Razor-sharp, pyramidal shoulders emerged, followed by 2 grasping hands, each one large enough to crush me to death within its grip. Spiraling up its chest, I saw hundreds of people crucified, their mouths opened in silent screams, their eyes wide and wild. Countless white shards of bone poked out through the beast's skin, as long and thin as swords, penetrating through the hands and feet of each victim and keeping them locked in their positions of torment. Black veins wrapped around their legs and arms, disappearing into quarter-sized holes eaten into their skin. Fluid constantly pumped through the dark tendrils into the writhing victims. The stone skin seemed to ripple as the creature breathed through its alien body. Its massive chest expanded and contracted as lungs like forged bellows worked furiously. More and more pieces of sandy earth fell into the seemingly infinite void beneath the beast's frantic climbing. But I knew that, at this rate, it would rip its way out of the ground within seconds. I turned to run, seeing Tristan already sprinting blindly ahead up the sandy slope of the mountain. My heart pounded furiously in my chest as waves of adrenaline shook my body. At that moment, I had no rational thoughts, just the screaming primal panic telling me to get far away from this creature from hell. I zigzagged from side to side, feeling its alien eyes boring holes into my back. A heartbeat later, its heavy stone hand came smashing down only inches to the left of my body, swiping wildly at the dead earth. I felt the air whoosh past my head, as if a tractor trailer had just driven past. Fingers as thick as cinder blocks closed around the dune, gripping blindly at the sand and lifting tons of it into the air in a terrifying show of blind strength. The beast gave another splitting banshee shriek, a wail of insane fury. I continued sprinting blindly up the slope, my brother slipping and sliding 10 feet ahead of me. Sometimes we scrabbled on all fours, always hearing the strange creature with its rippling skin and crucified bodies ripping apart the earth to drag itself closer to us. My instinct told me that, if this hellish thing got a hold of us, it would force us against the outside of its body with all the other silently shrieking victims, impaling us on the sharp points of bone that stuck out from its chest like the spikes of an iron maiden. Ahead of us, I saw a break in the ascending slope, a patch of jagged blackness cutting across the soft, yellow sands. It was the height of a child, opening up like a ragged, toothless mouth before us. A small, pinched face peeked out of the darkness, a little boy. He was an emaciated wreck. His scarecrow-thin body was wrapped in fraying, hole-filled clothes. He wore an ancient shirt and pair of jeans that looked like they were literally falling off his starving frame. Countless burns and scars covered every inch of his exposed skin, as if he had been tortured and beaten his entire life. The boy quickly waved me and Tristan forward, backing into the cave as he did so. His lips moved frantically, but I couldn't hear anything over the roaring of the beast. I was afraid to look back. I could feel and hear the ground shattering apart directly behind me. Tristan scrambled into the cave ahead of me, diving in head first and dragging himself forward like a panicked animal. I was only feet away, running on all fours through the slippery white sands that collapsed beneath me with every step. I thought my heart would explode if I didn't stop soon. My entire body was covered in sweat, but cold waves of adrenaline kept pushing me forward. The little boy had crawled deeper into the cave, his small, dirt-streaked face barely visible now. Tristan had disappeared into the shadows behind him. I leapt for the opening, as a massive hand smashed down on the top of the cavern's opening directly above my head. Sharp splinters of rock rained down on me as I rolled through. One heavy piece cracked into the back of my ribs, forcing the air out of my lungs. With a loud gasp, I screamed as pain exploded through my chest. I kept crawling forward towards the face of the boy. As more rocks fell with a sound like a rushing waterfall, I must have lost consciousness, because the next thing I remember, someone was dragging me over rough rock. Pain like fire shot through my chest every time I breathed. Smaller cuts and agonies covered the rest of my body. I swore, my head swimming with a horrible splitting migraine. Ahead of me, Tristan turned around to face me, shining his cell phone's flashlight back at my face. I felt warm trickles of blood running down my forehead and back. "Where are we?" I gasped, looking around at the claustrophobic granite tunnel that closed in around us like a coffin. Tristan had to crawl forwards bent over, his back hunched. The little boy standing in front of him had no issue. However, "These are the tunnels to the Badlands," the little boy said, his scarred face a stoic, unreadable mask. "All the caverns here seem to connect there." Some of the other kids say there are even tunnels that lead to heaven and hell, but I've never seen them myself. I'm very careful where I go. If I see fire at the bottom of a tunnel, I turn around. Smart kid, I don't know how you've lived this long. Kid, I turned to my brother, Tristan. We're trapped in the game, I said, wincing as I touched my side. I had definitely cracked a couple ribs. We've got to beat it and get the hell out before we die here. I have a feeling that, if we die here, we die for real. These broken ribs definitely feel real enough. I thought it was something insane like that. Tristan responded, shaking his head disbelievingly. In reality, I figure I'm probably in a coma somewhere hallucinating this whole thing. But sure, I'll play along. How do we beat the game? From what I remember, we have to somehow make our way through purgatory and find God, I answered, knowing how insane it sounded. The little boy shook his head furiously. I crawled to my feet, having to bend down like Tristan in the confined tunnel. Together, we started slowly creeping forward, using Tristan's phone to light the way. I wondered how the boy had passed through these tunnels in the dark. You don't want to go back out into purgatory, the boy answered. If the creepers catch you, you will end up crucified on their bodies forever. They keep you alive with their black creepers that eat their way into your body and give you water and food. They want to make sure you stay alive for the torture. The creepers, I asked, is that what you call them? The boy nodded, his face going pale. They're horrible, he said. They've taken most of my friends. Everyone I first knew when I got here is stuck on one of their bodies. They can hear through their skin. If you walk on the dunes, they will hear you and crawl out of the abyss to get you. Kid, what's your name? Tristan asked, taking a step closer to the boy. He put a calloused hand on the boy's shoulder. The boy instinctively flinched, drawing away. Gage, he said, still keeping a safe distance between us and him. He seemed flitty and uncertain, probably a result of the nightmarish and horrifying things he had seen here in purgatory. Gage Bright, where do these tunnels lead, then? Away from the creepers, I asked. Gage frowned, looking even more nervous now. I told you, to the Badlands. They have food and drinks there sometimes. I found a whole vending machine a few days ago, full of beef jerky, and candy, and soda. But there's things there, too. They're not as bad as the creepers. I don't think anything is as bad as the creepers, except maybe hell. As we talked and moved forward, I realized there was a strange, fiery light flickering from below us. The tunnel had started to descend rapidly, the smooth granite feeling slippery and smooth beneath my sneakers. Be quiet now, Gage whispered urgently, his pale blue eyes widening as he stared intently down at the strobing radiance filling the tunnel. We're at the border of realities, and sometimes things creep out from the void and slip through the cracks. At the bottom of the steep tunnel, the cave started to morph and change. The stone looked like it slowly melted into pale yellow wallpaper. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered constantly, turned up to a whining drone like a drill in my brain. There was a filthy gray carpet covering the floors, glimmering wetly. Drops of sickly brown liquid were spattered over the top of it. A smell like pneumonia blew up from the hall. At the border of the cavern and the hallway, there were deep, black cracks spiderwebbing through where the melted wood and frozen drippings of hard granite met. As Gage led us past them, I peered into the darkness outside. It looked like I was staring into an abyss, an infinite void as cold and empty as outer space. I thought I caught a flash of something pale and worm-like at the far edge of my vision, but when I turned to look, it was just more empty space. I looked forward, seeing Gage rapidly waving me forward, his face a frozen, pale mask of terror. He shook his head silently from side to side, his icy eyes never dropping from mine. He stared intently at me, the intelligence and fear reflected in his expression making him look like a much older boy. Tristan was peering into the countless rooms that covered each side of the hallway. I quickly walked forward, making as little noise as I could. Gage, I whispered when we had gotten far away from those cracks. Do you know where God is? Gage looked over at me nervously, shaking his head, pointing forward. I glanced around at the rooms surrounding us, seeing them filled with upside-down stop signs, blinking traffic lights, and other random objects. Some of them were totally empty, just filled with the piss-colored wallpaper and wet carpets. The next one had a dead, mummified body hanging from the ceiling. Its skin was so desiccated and papery that I couldn't even tell if it had been a man or a woman. Gage seemed totally unaffected by this, glancing over with disinterest. I noticed other doors lead into their own straight, seemingly never-ending halls that disappeared in a pinpoint far off in the distance. I wondered just how big this place really was. Suddenly, Gage stopped, motioning me and Tristan nearer to him. "You guys are really looking to talk to God," Gage whispered. I noticed that the far end of the hallway slowly morphed back into dark granite tunnels, the wood and stone mixing in unnatural, chaotic drippings and patterns. I nodded excitedly, talking louder than I meant to. Gage instantly winced. "We need to see God as soon as possible," I said. "Preferably before we die," Tristan added cynically. "God is at the top of the border of purgatory and heaven," Gage whispered, giving me a dirty look. "Keep your voice down before something notices us." He pointed at the end of the hall. I saw that here, the stone caverns ascended instead of descending. If you follow the path back up, you'll come out at the top of purgatory near the god's silver spire. But the place is swarming with creepers. I wouldn't. I never got to hear the last of his thought. I heard a cracking like bones behind us. I jumped, spinning around to see the hallway tearing itself apart down the middle. The walls split apart, splintering, and falling into a seemingly eternal abyss that lay all around it. Something alien twisted and spun there, a horror from between worlds. It reminded me of a massive hellish worm, something that had evolved in some dark black hole world, where sinister and powerful monsters skittered under the surface. Circular ridges like those of an earthworm covered the length of its body. Its skin was pale and wet-looking, the color of writhing maggots. It was nearly as wide as the hallway itself, its body as long as a tunnel. The worm gave a soft hissing sound. Two milky cataract eyes stared out from each side of its head, flat and lacking any pupils or iris that I could see. Its lips were tightly pressed together, looking like no more than a pale, white scar healed across its monstrous face. Hundreds of hollow, translucent fangs curved outwards over it, overlapping and dripping with frothy saliva. Each looked large enough to impale a full-grown man. The worm, "Fill up," Gage screamed. "Don't let it take you." My cracked ribs shrieked with fresh waves of pain as I stumbled down the hall towards the intersection of the stone and wood where the cavern started rising in a steep slope. The floor collapsed beneath our feet, the wooden splinters exploding and clattering down into a seemingly never-ending drop. Tristan was in the lead, frantically making his way towards safety. Gage was by my side. Sharp pieces of dark granite littered the end of the hallway's floor. More and more loose pieces of the cavern fell downwards as the hallway ripped itself apart in a rhythmic, smashing cacophony, shaking the entire structure with chaotic rumbles. I felt the ground dissolving beneath my feet. Gage's eyes widened in horror next to me as the wooden board started disassembling beneath him like pieces of a puzzle falling apart. A small foot caught one of the stones, the boy falling forward, as if in slow motion. I leapt towards the stone floor only 5 feet away with all my strength, feeling the wood give a sickening lurch beneath me before disappearing. Gage screamed, his eyes widening. As he fell, I scrambled down over the edge of the stone, trying to reach a hand out and grab him. But within the space of a heartbeat, he was gone, falling down into the darkness, his screams fading like the last echoes of a dying heartbeat. Tristan. And I stopped a few dozen feet down the stone cavern. I bent over, catching my breath and clutching my damaged chest. I heard Tristan hyperventilating only a few feet away. "Is Gage?" he asked. I nodded grimly. "He fell," I answered sadly. The stone cavern continued to shake violently. I could hear the worm softly slithering around its edges, slamming its massive body into the walls. "Tristan." And I looked up at the top of the tunnel, seeing a hypnotizing, rainbow-colored effulgence spiraling down from the top. Somehow, seeing such beauty in this place of horrors gave me a sliver of renewed hope. Gage wrapped an arm around my shoulders, helping me up. I stumbled forward, every breath in agony. We came out the top of the stone tunnel, finding ourselves standing on top of a sandy mountain. They were much higher than all the surrounding ones. I could look out hundreds of miles in each direction across the dead mountains of purgatory, seeing the white sands and pointed peaks disappearing off in the distance. On top of the mountain we found ourselves on, I beheld a beautiful spire soaring thousands of feet into the air. Atop of it disappeared into the roiling clouds overhead. The beauty of the tower was breathtaking, its architecture graceful and otherworldly. Strands of fresh, polished silver spiraled up around its outside like the steps of a lighthouse. The tower grew thinner as it ascended, until the very top looked like no more than an enormous silver railroad spike stabbing up into the black clouds. "We need to find the door," I whispered at Tristan as we crept closer to the silver spire. It was only a few hundred feet away, As we drew closer, the size of the tower truly hit home, its top disappearing miles above my head. We hadn't made it far when the first soft rumbling started underneath our feet. Tristan gave me a look of absolute horror as fissures opened up all around us. I knew it was a creeper. A single moment later, a monstrous stone face appeared. Enormous arms dragged the abomination up and out of the splitting dunes. Tristan and I ran blindly toward the silver spire, the burning pain in my ribs temporarily forgotten in the rush of adrenaline and primal terror. An enormous hand came down, smashing hard into the ground feet in front of me. The powerful stone fingers swiped at the dunes around Tristan. He gave a cry like a little boy as they closed around his chest, lifting him into the air. The primal roaring of the creeper continued growing, the insane anger and bloodlust filling every note with their dark presence. I saw 2 long, pointed castle doors at the other side of the silver spire. These looked like they had been fashioned from solid gold. On the front of each, there were engraved pictures of strange creatures with 4 faces, one facing in each direction. They each had the faces of a lion, an eagle, an ox, and a man, their bodies cloaked in armor. "Help me, Andrew," Tristan pleaded, his voice growing distant as the creeper dragged him away. I felt sick and weak imagining my brother being tortured and crucified for all eternity on that hellish beast's body. Turning, I started jumping up and down, screaming at the creeper, its head ratcheted towards me, its bulbous, black eyes shining with an inhuman luster. With its other hand, it struck out blindly at me, but its fingers smashed into the silver spire above my head. The tower rung with a sound like a struck gong, a vibrating cacophony that rose in waves up and down its length. The creeper continued moving Tristan closer to its chest. I saw a clear spot there reserved just for him. As I watched, sharp points of bone suddenly poked out through its skin, setting the spot for Tristan's unending nightmare. I heard a hissing from behind me, a sound that sent both waves of dread and a small, simmering hope racing through my chest. I turned, seeing the worm emerging from the sands laying in front of the exit of the cavern, its pale, maggot-like head twisting up. The creeper roared at it. Tristan held frozen in place in its hand still, his lips frantically moving, but no sounds coming out. The creeper and the worm stared at each other across a no-man's land of whipping dunes and blowing sands, neither moving. They might have both been statues at that moment. Without warning, they ran at each other, Tristan now completely forgotten. The creeper took his fist with Tristan still inside and struck out at the worm. I saw Tristan's body go flying in the chaos of the battle, soaring through the air in a graceful arc. Spatters of bright blood followed him through the air. A moment later, Tristan landed in front of me, gasping and bleeding. I ran over to him, my breath catching in my throat. His entire left arm was gone, ripped off. Bright red arterial blood spurted from the ragged stump, staining the beige sands a deep scarlet. His eyes met mine, fluttering and roaming the black, hellish skies overhead with ineffable pain and fear. I tried dragging him towards the door to the silver spire, but the tail of the worm had begun whipping wildly, missing us by inches. I was forced to drop him and sprint blindly for cover, heading in the direction of the golden door. I heard a primal screaming, seeing the creeper had grabbed the worm in its hands. Twisting its body in its powerful hands, it threw the worm against the sands, the crashing sound booming across the world. As the worm lay limply twitching, the creeper slunk forward, ready to finish off its opponent. But the worm came to life, lunging towards the creeper. It pushed itself off the ground with its tail, uncoiling and flying across the air, its gnashing teeth aimed for the creeper's stone head and bulging black eyes. It bit hard into the right side of the creeper's face, sending thick, oily blood exploding from the wound. The creeper's right eye exploded like a water balloon filled with sludge. The creeper screamed, grabbing the worm by its tail and pulling. It yanked the worm off along with a large chunk of its own face, whipping it against the ground again. The worm lay stunned for a second, which was all the creeper needed. The creeper put his 2 massive stone fists together, bringing them down on the back of the worm's pale head. There was an explosion like a plane crash as they connected, the worm's black brains exploding through the top of its body in a thick jet of gore. I ran through the silver door into the tower. Stairs made of fine threads of silver and gold spun around upwards seemingly forever. I crept up the steps slowly, my breath coming in painful hitches. After hours of this, I found myself at the top of the tower. It had continuously narrowed as I ascended until it was no larger than a tomb. A silver door stood before me with a single eye engraved on it. Bracing myself for what lay behind, I flung it open. God stood before me, his skin as white and smooth as marble, and eyes as black as smoke. He towered over me, his body softly radiating a rainbow of light that shimmered and rippled around him like a mystical aura. And yet, that face seemed oddly familiar. I stared through the layers of unfolding energy at God, realizing I saw my own face reflected there. "Why do you look like me?" I asked, confused and scared. God's eyes never blinked. They bored through me like lasers. It felt as if they were staring into my soul, as if everything was ripped open, laid out, and revealed here in this tower of silver and gold. "I am you," he spoke in a voice like thunder. "After death, your consciousness continues evolving until it becomes me. All beings have their own God, their own future self that sits at the top of the silver spire. In many trillions of years, you will become a god in your own right." I had no idea what to say to that. "If you're so powerful, can you bring Tristan and Gage back? I didn't deserve to die, after all," I said. God's white, marble lips seemed to split into a faint smile. At that, "It is dangerous to say what anyone deserves. Does the sheep deserve slaughter? Do the birds caught in hurricanes deserve to have their bodies whipped against concrete until they're just blood and feathers? In the chaos of the universe, there is no mercy, and yet actions have consequences. Gage and Tristan have already been judged and sent forward to continue their own path, their own evolution to the divine, and you must continue yours." The last words faded out into white noise and static. Black and white dots started crawling their way down God's marble white skin, over his smooth, flawless flesh. They continued expanding out into a tunnel, and yet again, I felt myself drawn forward. I found myself standing in front of the TV in my living room, the virtual God still plugged in. The eye glowed with a soft white radiance. As I looked around, on the sofa behind me lay Tristan's body, crushed and broken, missing an arm. His sightless eyes stared blankly up, his face eternally frozen in a death mask of mortal terror, and in his remaining broken, bloody hand, I saw he was still tightly gripping the controller for the virtual God.